the recording has begun, and as usual, if I could request the participants to mute yourself, and if you wish to turn on video, perhaps you can turn it on at Q&A session. So it's a pleasure that you all can join us. So good evening and good afternoon and good morning. I think at least one or two from the States also are joining, as far as I can see. So today I'm delighted to introduce Rachelle, Saruya, sorry, who's a PhD candidate at the Department of the Study of Religion at University of Toronto. Her research interest includes a range of topics from Abhidhamma, as well as Myanmar-Burmese Theravada Buddhism, Buddhist nuns, and to gender and Buddhism and religious education and the Burmese diaspora in the US. Her dissertation is the ethnography of one of the nun teaching nunnery in Sagaing in Myanmar, but which actually allows for an examination of the networks and connection that nunnery has with other teaching nunneries, and her talk today, I think, will explore a little bit of that. In addition, her work focuses on 14 Buddhist nuns, their experiences with education and monastic training, as well as their space of choice and convenience that help mediate these practices. So I won't, without further delay, I would like to invite Rachelle. So over to you, Rachelle.
Thank you so much, P. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. Yes, thank you for joining me, and thank you, P, Kate, Angela, and Olivia for organizing this and having me speak today. So before I begin, I just want to say a few things. One is that I may pronounce Pali words in the Burmese pronunciation. And one is because I was originally trained in this way, or I will attempt to pronounce it in a Burmese pronunciation, I should say. And that two, maybe it's a more anthropological method, but many nuns don't maybe have the education or the experience of traveling abroad and knowing the international pronunciation of Pali. So maybe I'm critiquing it a little bit as an elite of pronunciation. But that being said, I may say like the Singhalavada Sutta, just like that. But if I were to pronounce it in Burmese, it would be the S with the TH and the V like a W, so the Singhalavada. And then, yes, my research kind of began, I became interested in Buddhism, learning Burmese and Abhidhamma from a monk in the San Francisco Bay Area. That's where I'm from. And it's through his connection to his sister, who was a Tileshin in Sagaing, that I've been able to carry out this research. And he was the one that first encouraged me to write about nuns. And I believe it is because of how proud he is of his sister that she's a nun, and that still not enough attention is paid to them. So that being said, let's start. Let's see, this works. Okay, so I want to start with a couple of verses from the Singhalavada Sutta. So here the Buddha is talking to Singhala, and he says, "O householder's son, the teacher should be revered by a student as the southern direction in these 5 ways: by getting up and greeting them, by waiting on, by listening respectfully, by looking after, by carefully learning all the skills taught." And then the next verse, "O householder's son, the teacher is revered by a student as the southern direction, shows compassion to the student in these 5 ways. Training the student well, they cause the student to grasp the tightly their teachings. They make the student become knowledgeable in all the skills that they know. They introduce the students to friends and associates, and they protect the students in all directions. And I will get back to these, the sutta in a few minutes. So the education trajectories of Myanmar-Burmese Buddhist nuns, or Tilashin, are often far from straightforward. So nuns have several teachers and study at many locations. The trajectories have been described in the past as piecemeal, as nuns had difficulties locating good teachers and teachers willing to teach them. Recently, however, the nun population has increased, which partially can be attributed to their improved status in Myanmar society. So more and more nuns are passing difficult monastic examinations, demonstrating that they too can be learned in Buddhist teachings. And current literature on monastics and the examinations mostly exclude the Tilashin's own voices. So here I will provide material that complements the existing work from the nuns' perspectives and answering the following questions. So how do the nuns themselves think of these exams? What cultural and monastic boundaries might shape the nuns' education trajectories? And why have nuns become more successful? And while there may be many contributing factors, here I want to focus on the themes of responsibility, gratitude, and what is referred to in Burmese as Jesusat, or returning the gratitude to those who have helped along the way. So I suggest that these characteristics need to be reevaluated as they play a significant role in Myanmar monastic experience and help produce interlocking relationships between teacher and student and between monastic kin. So by dismissing these phenomena, we miss aspects of the lived experience of Buddhist practitioners and the sustaining of supportive relationships between teachers and students and monks and nuns. So the themes of responsibility, gratitude, and Jesusat have surfaced in my field research, which includes the Singhalovada Sutta in Myanmar education, both at the secular and monastic levels. So in Myanmar, lay children and young monastics memorize the Singhalovada Sutta in various forms, such as in Burmese translation, and or as Lady Seattle's version, the Dukumara Magadipani. So for the monastics, I believe that memorizing the sutta is not just about gaining the ability to preach it to the laity, but it is also to set an example, and as Dhammasami says in his work, instilling responsibilities and duties that all members of society should abide by to attain a meritorious rebirth as well as maintain a harmonious society. And for those of you who may not be familiar with this sutta, there's a man named Singhala, and he's worshiping the 6 directions based on his late father's wishes. And then the Buddha, seeing this, tells him how he should be doing it, how he should be worshiping the 6 directions according to the noble ones. So in the beginning, those verses were the Buddha was telling Singhala how to worship the southern direction. So, so here's a quote from Bhikkhu Bodhi. So in the Singhalovada Sutta, the practice of worshiping the 6 directions presupposes that society is sustained by a network of interlocking relationships that bring coherence to the social order when its members fulfill their reciprocal duties and responsibilities. So these responsibilities play out in the laity in a variety of relationships. So you have the parent-child, the husband-wife, the teacher-student, the renunciate lay supporter. So here I want to argue that the boundaries for monastics and laity that concern responsibility and Jesusat are not dissimilar, but that they can develop in various and often gendered ways. So novice monks may or may not study this sutta in particular, depending on the monastery, but often boys memorize a Burmese version as part of their government education, and after entering novicehood, they study the Mahawega of the Paliwaniya. So more specifically, references to the students taking care of their teachers are found in the Ubezaya Godakata, and the teachers' reciprocal responsibilities and duties to take care of their students is covered in the following section of the Dadi Viharika Watakata. So the Tilashin are tested on the Dukumara Magadipani at the most basic level of monastic education, and therefore studying this different text somewhat defines them as Tilashin and associates them more strongly with the householder status because they do not learn the Vinaya. So the nuns do, however, have their own rules and regulations that were written by the first Mahagandhi Seattle and the founding abbess at Ojang. Ojang is one of the nunneries I'll be looking at. And there's a section in this booklet relating to the responsibilities for the newly ordained nun and the guardian nun based on similar structures from the above mentioned texts. So here you have first the duties for the guardian nun, which includes the guardian nun should instruct the nun in training on how to wear the robes. The guardian nun should instruct the nun in training on how to perform the various tasks in the nunnery according to the senior nun's instructions. And then if the nun in training does something wrong at the time of punishment, the nun responsible for that nun should receive punishment. And then you have the reciprocal verses. So the duties for the nun in training include the nun in training should listen to and obey the instructions from the guardian nun. Number 2, the nun in training should attend to the daily needs of the guardian nun respectfully, thinking that no other nun will take responsibility for her and therefore be very grateful to her. I think that's a very interesting one. And then 3, the nun in training should listen to the occasional admonishing from the guardian nun. All right, so from this, I define responsibility then as a duty or obligation. And this is primarily twofold. So for monastics, this comes in the form of taking care of their students, and then reciprocally, students taking care of their teachers. More generally, a subsidiary level of responsibility includes the laity taking care of monastics, and the monastics taking care of the laity, especially if they are students. And then what stems from this is sacrifice, and that students or teachers may sacrifice their best interests for the other's welfare, and the gratitude and jesusat that is manifested as a result of mutual care. So also important are the relationships and responsibilities that monastic kin have towards one another. Here the nuns may play a larger role in influencing and shaping the education trajectories of their male monastic kin, demonstrating significant informal power. And I will give an example below. The monks in turn express gratitude and jesusat, which turns into the responsibility to take care of their Tilishan kin. So in his study of kinship in a Burmese village, Melford Spiro writes that the emphasis in Burma on moral obligation or duty is the essence of the social bond. He further notes, kinship as such is not conceived to be the domain of love, nor even of friendship, although they may overlap and even coincide, but of moral obligation. Indeed, the whole point of kinship, in contrast to other kinds of relationships, is that in it and in it alone, moral obligations must be honored regardless of one's feelings. So Spiro's work, though dating back to the 1960s and frequently criticized, still contains many insightful observations. So here I want to look at the importance of responsibility or duty in Burmese Buddhist society and how normative kinship duties prevalent in mainstream society bleed into the monastic domain. However, there's scholars such as Liz Wilson or Shane Clark, Reiko Onuma, and others have documented Buddhism is not just about going forth into the homeless life and severing ties with one's family, but also that relations with family often do not cease once one has become a monastic. For instance, as Onuma points out, the reason the Buddha allowed for his stepmother and aunt to enter the order as the first bhikkhuni was due to family obligations and the debt he owed to her for raising him as though he was her own. So I also want to define responsibility then, not just in the reciprocal performance between two subjects taking care of each other, but as the responsibility for both sides to preserve the Buddhist teachings. So monks and nuns fear the teaching's disappearance, as is predicted in the Pali Canon. British colonial rule exacerbated this fear, and this fear is still articulated today with society undergoing rapid change. So in Myanmar, a strict monastic examination system has emerged, which the tradition presents it aimed at preserving the scriptural canon and the doctrines it contains verbatim. So here I also want to demonstrate, however, that monastic studying the scriptures and the merit accrued benefits those surrounding and supporting them. So this is a motivation and a form of jesusat for the monastic to continue their study and pass these difficult examinations that take up much of their time and energy. So, of course, current research regarding monastic education is still mostly conducted in the context of male monastic institutions, and the study of Burmese women rarely focuses on nuns. So PPO points to some differences between monks and nuns in her research, having ordained as a temporary nun. But it is Hiroko Kawanami's work that gives us the only real dedicated description of the nuns and the nuns and their education. So using ethnographic data on the nuns' experiences with the monastic examinations from field research starting in 2012, I engaged with 9 Buddhist nuns from 3 different nunneries in Sagaing, Myanmar. And for those of you who don't know where Sagaing is, it's middle upper Burma, about an hour away from Mandalay. And there are thousands of monks and nuns that live there, and has become quite a monastic education center, and also a meditation center. So I examined the nuns' education trajectories, the uniqueness and similarities at the 3 nunneries, and then to what degree the Tilishans' education depends on the monks' support and the monks' willingness to teach them. So I provide a glimpse into the ways that these nunneries and monasteries are connected, paying attention to the networks and relationships that all of these places have, demonstrating their interlocking relationships. And while my larger project includes a more detailed analysis of the curriculum, like I look at what the nuns study, how they study, the textbooks they're studying, here I'm only limiting to comparing which texts are prescribed for monks and which are for nuns. And it is also important to note that there's numerous exams in Myanmar. So here I'm only looking at a few of the best well-known. So let's see. So I only want to go over briefly the historical dimensions, as this has been done at length in both Dhammasami's work and then PPOJ's work. But basically, the monastic examinations have been used by the reigning establishments for different purposes. So the first exams, more specifically a version of the Patamapian, were established for monks in the 1600s, with subsequent kings following suit. So Dhammasami shows us that the exams at this time were predominantly imposed for political reasons, in order to eliminate monks who ordained with the intentions of avoiding forced labor and conscription. And then the Sangha did not accept the exams as a means to educate monks until King Mindon's reign in the late 1800s, in response to Mindon's reform that changed the exams to better fit the Sangha's needs. So the exams have fostered a formal education system that now consists of a set syllabus. And this system replaced informal teaching, where the teaching monk determined the material important for his students on the basis of the training he himself received. So this change in structure now satisfied the demands for passing the exams, which have become increasingly important and prestigious in Myanmar society. However, of course, this formal education system has not been met without its critics. So certain leading monks, such as the Mahagandhion Seato and then most recently Dhammasami, have criticized the emphasis on the exams. So complaints largely regard the Sangha's loss of autonomy. Monasteries and nunneries cannot develop their own syllabus and curriculum, as was the case before. Monks and nuns only study texts on the syllabus, therefore they miss out on other important texts. And then many monks and nuns study so strenuously that they may become discouraged and drop out. Some become very ill. So with regards to nuns, nuns were not allowed to sit for the Patamapian until 1901. In 1915 was when the first nun passed this exam. And then a year after the colonial government's establishment of the Dhamma we have the first nun to pass at the age of 40. This would have been in the 1940s. Both of these nuns were from the Sagaing Hills, which is proof of the strong scholarly environment that developed in this area. And then just a brief, a broad overview of nuns' formal education. So In general, if a nun pursues formal education, she may choose 2 different paths. She may proceed with secular education, which is referred to as loki peña, or commence immediately into monastic education, which is often referred to as lokotara peña. And here I just, some people might wonder why I'm translating these terms. So in Abhidhamma terms, and deriving from the Pali word lokiya, loki peña might be better translated as mundane wisdom, or wisdom not associated with the 4 stages of enlightenment. And then you have lokotara peña on the other hand, which is often translated as super mundane wisdom. But in Burmese popular speech, Pali is often not employed in their scriptural definitions. So that is why here I'm using it like this. So once on the monastic education track, and after learning the basic chants, such as the Pareta or the Patana, the nun would study for the Padamapyan exam. So there's 4 levels to this exam. So the nun first studies at the Muladan level, or the root level, or the primary level. Then she, after passing, she would study at the Patamangye level, or the beginning level. After this, intermediate, or Patamalat, and then the advanced level, or the Patamaji. So after passing the Padamapyan, then the nuns may sit for the Dhammasariya exam. And the government Dhammasariya exam is the exam which most nuns are ultimately trying to pass. So some nuns may decide to pass these exams altogether, bypass these exams altogether, and pursue other qualifications such as a BA, an MA, or a PhD degree. And then certain institutions require passing the Patamapyan before admission, and some institutions offer their own version of the Dhammasariya. So there's different education routes that a nun could take. So the government Patamapyan and the Dhammasariya exam syllabi are the same for both monks and nuns, with few exceptions. So the difference lies within the Patamapyan. So nuns are required to study the Dukumara Magadipani at the Mula level, and the Dhammapada at the Nye, Lat, and G levels instead of the Vinaya. So the Vinaya is not part of the nun syllabus, as Tilashin are not Bhikkhunis. They do not need to abide by the rules and regulations that are practiced by fully ordained monks. So the Dhammapada is a popular text, so I'm not going to talk much about that. But the Dukumara Magadipani, on the other hand, less so. So Lady Seattle wrote this text as a Vinaya for the youth. The booklet is a short text of 86 pages and outlines basic rules and regulations. It also includes recitations such as okata, or devotional formulas, wish verses or sutang, the qualities of the Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha, the 10 parami, the 5 and 8 precepts, etc. So most of these have the original Pali with nisayas, or Burmese glosses of the Pali words. There are also instructions on how and what the lay boys and girls should recite. And then at the end of this book, Lady Seattle writes that the text should be studied by those under 20. And when finished, one should then study his book on grammar, what might be translated as a summary of grammar, and then his poem on the Abhitamata Dingaha, titled Summary of Ultimates. So the Dukumara Magadipani begins with a retelling of the Singalavada from the Digha Nikaya, and most of this text is based on this sutta and the commentary. And I also want to suggest that perhaps, I'm not a historian, but that I think I mentioned it in a previous lecture, that perhaps Lady Seattle did have a connection with Dhammapala in Sri Lanka, because these texts were written around the same time. Dhammapala wrote a similar text in about 1895. And this text, I don't have an original, like a date for this text, so I don't know for sure, but it's just a thought. So let's move to the first nunnery I look at. So here we're looking at Dita Saten Dait. Many of you are familiar with this. I actually met P here in, I think, 2012. So this is the newest out of the 3 reviewed here. Established in 1998 by Dr. Hiroko Kawanami, who purchased the land. and led by 3 nuns. The vision to create Dita has developed into an institution that has been nicknamed the Oxford of Nunneries. The nunnery has developed significantly since the 1990s with the addition of a multi-storied building that houses a library and a sizable Dhamma hall that can accommodate the nunnery's extensive community of over 200 nuns. So in the previously built smaller Dhamma hall sits a large bamboo Buddha statue. It's placed behind glass walls. It's air conditioned. So Dita is a nunnery strictly focused on pariyatti, or learning the Buddhist scriptures. It is considered a teaching nunnery where the Tilishin have formal group classes and are training to pass the monastic examinations. However, these types of nunneries only make up about 12% of the number of nunneries in Sagaing. So the rest would be the non-teaching nunneries. So the nuns at Dita teach all levels of the Patamabhyan in addition to the Dhammanejo and the Dhamma Saruya. And this is important to note because many nunneries don't teach all of these subjects. So girl children often become nuns due to the influence from Tilishin relatives. So Mawezati is the first nun I look at. She's a teaching nun at the age of 33. I met her in the smaller Dhamma hall for one of our interviews. She started her life at the nunnery Jailajang. And as her mother explained, Mawezati loves her auntie, or Manyanati. Manyanati is the sister of the monk in the San Francisco Bay Area. So she was inspired by her auntie to become a nun. So Mawezati's cousins, who are in their early 20s, also joined Dita eventually after first residing at Jailat. So these familial connections demonstrate the monastic kinship that pervade nunneries as well as monasteries. Having more secular education differentiates the previous generation from the current generation of nuns. So Mawezati studied secular education at a government school up to 4th grade. At that time, monks and nuns were not permitted to study at government schools after 4th grade. But currently, certain government schools in Sagaing have allowed for monks and nuns to study beyond this. Also, a few Baka schools or Bakajangs or monastic schools that teach subjects such as math and science have opened up, which allow for monks and nuns to study up to grades 9 and 10. So after having enjoyed a secular education for several years, nuns may then choose to study for the monastic exams. So Mawezati resided at a nunnery in Monua after her secular education, studying for the Patamabhyan. She had already passed the exam and was older than most nuns when joining Dita. Nevertheless, she was considered an exception and is now one of the nunnery's top teachers. She has recently passed all sections of the Dhamma Saruya, and only at the time of this, when I was writing this, only 10 nuns at Dita have come so far in the nunnery's 20-year history, demonstrating how difficult this exam is. And 10 nuns may sound very few, but compared to other monasteries and nunneries, this is actually quite a lot. So one exam that was not always open to the Tilishin was the Dhammanejo. So Tilishin could only sit for this exam from 1998. Nuns are now allowed to sit for the exam and have enough knowledge to teach the material to other nuns, but this was only possible after learning from monks. So Mawezati's brother, a monk from Jajang, was allowed to teach the Dhammanejo exam material to the Dita nuns. So Myasaja is a very prestigious monastery close by that traditionally forbids monks from teaching Tilishin and other women due to their strict adherence to the Vinaya. This one exception to teach nuns came with the understanding that once this knowledge had been passed, the nuns would need to take up the responsibility to teach the material to others. So Mawezati now has the knowledge to teach this material to the other nuns. So although the syllabus is the same for all nuns, teachers may use various books to prepare their students for these exams. Often these are texts that were written by their own teachers. When asking Mawezati about one of the nisyas that they were using to support the understanding of the text at the Patamaji level, I discovered that this nisya happened to be written by Insane Seattle. So he's one of the most famous and influential monks in Myanmar. So I'd asked if the teachers chose the support text or if they were assigned. And Mawezati explained that this newer generation does not understand like the older generation. So Insane Seattle wrote this book with that in mind, according to the current times. So here's a picture of one of his books. So his books have become very popular amongst many nunneries and monasteries. They're all bound in a yellow cover and have the words lesang, meaning present or gift, as Pipi Ojo also notes in her work. He has written numerous books on the Abhidhamma, including the Patana, and even produced a video and CD on teaching methods. So Mawezati explained to me that when a teaching monk or nun has passed the Dhamma Saruya, even though they may have this degree, they may not know how to teach. Therefore, Insane Seattle has explained ways for this. The head teaching nuns at Dita are Insane Seattle students, starting from when they were very young. This is why many of his books are used. The teaching methods and system were given to this nunnery from this monk, and that is why they give so much gratitude to him. So the nunnery even has a statue of him to the left of the main Buddha statue. I've also noticed his frequent visits to the nunnery. So one can see the importance of the monk's support for the Tileshin, in addition to, of course, the nun's support of monks, which contributes towards the establishment and maintenance of these interlocking relationships. I'd also asked Mawezati at a later time about the inclusion of the Dukumara Magadipani at the Mula level of the Patamapian. And she explained that, sorry, this is such a long quote, to study for the Muladan currently, it is while the student is young, to learn, understand, practice, and carry out duties by learning moral obligations and abstaining from certain behaviors, such when taking the precepts. By learning duties, abstaining from certain actions, taking the precepts, the student will gain much knowledge and receive many benefits. So for the nun, by learning the Dukumara Magadipani, they can admonish a layperson. The Buddha taught not only Lokottara, but also Loki, how to live in society, how to relate to each other. It teaches the people skills. One will also gain more faith in the Buddha, because again, the Buddha not only taught how to be free from samsara, but also taught how to live in the world. And if a nun or monk decides to disrobe, even in layperson life, they will hopefully be a good person because of having studied the Dukumara Magadipani. So the Dukumara Magadipani means for those under 20 years of age to follow the good path, the right path. The instructions are for all youth, novice monks, young nuns, and young lay people, for the relationship in society, for social duties and obligations, for the economy, doing good deeds, teaching people how to live. Nuns may do good deeds without learning this book because of culture, but by learning it, they will be more inclined to do their duties well. This small book also gives us the opportunity to learn this discourse early, because to study the original in the Nikaya takes skills only Dhamma Saruya students may have. And then Mawezati's two cousins, who I have known since they were at Jailat, also met me in this smaller Dhamma hall. They had finished high school before transferring to Dita and have recently passed the Patamalat. One of the cousins was also attending distance learning at a nearby university. So distance learning is a condensed version of education, and the student will reside at the university itself only for a short time. She has decided to major in Burmese. So the nuns at Dita are normally not allowed to pursue secular education, but exceptions have been made as distance education lasts only for a limited period of time. So while these three nuns' education trajectories are so far successful, I asked Mawezati if the education system was adequate for nuns or if they were still struggling, as I had heard from others. And she replied that it depends on a nun's desire and motivation. And I thought this was very indicative considering how she has really risen to the top and is a very motivated nun. So next I want to look at Amy Ojang. So there are a handful of older nunneries in Sagaing that carry on the traditions of the founding nuns and perhaps traditions that might be considered Sagaing style. Amy Ojang is located next door to Jailat Jang. So a nun from Molamyain established this nunnery in 1908, and in present there are around 135 nuns. The original abbess founded the nunnery for the purpose of meditation or patipati, but it quickly developed into a leading educational center and attracted many students. So consequently, the nunnery has nuns that practice both pariyati and patipati. So I interviewed one teaching nun at Amy Ojang who had been a nun for 44 years. Manyanati from Jailat accompanied me to this interview as the two nuns are good friends. And I don't have slides for this, so sorry. Amy Ojang is a teaching nunnery like Dita, but one of the differences is that nuns will learn from teaching monks up until the Dhammasariya level, when they tend to prefer learning from monks. I guess, let's see. So to my question about a possible preference of studying with monks or a lack of nun teachers, both nuns replied that there were sufficient nun teachers, but they believed that monks still had more knowledge than nuns. So the nuns explained that monks who received the Abhivamta or the Linkara titles were the ones to look out for. So as they explained to me, the young nuns, they think the monasteries are better. Not only they think this, but it is true because the rate that they pass is higher, learning at the monastery. And then the explanation is very good there. The monks can explain very clearly. At this time, I realized the nuns were not permitted to sit for the exams held by the Dachadiha committee, as there were no nuns that had the Abhivamta title. So in essence, the nuns had to learn from monks if monks are the only ones that can sit for these particular exams. So I asked the nuns if they would take these exams if allowed. And the nuns replied that they were too old now and that it requires a lot of brain power. But for young girls, there may be potential. The nuns looked like they could live with being excluded, and that they were even somewhat relieved. These particular exams are especially grueling, and not being allowed to take them perhaps relieves them from this pressure. And as Dhammasami notes in his work, many monks burn out or become discouraged from studying and sitting for these exams. And then Kawanami also mentions that the exams that nuns are allowed to take, the nuns often become ill and may drop out. So this Amy Ojang nun did not drop out, but it took her 20 years to complete the Dhammasariya. She studied so strenuously that her health deteriorated and she developed tremors. So this is not an unusual case and perhaps explains why the above mentioned monks have been critical of these exams. So the Amy Ojang's nun education trajectory was also varied. While studying for the Dhammasariya, she received instruction from monks with the Abhivamta title at monasteries in Mandalay. More specifically, she studied at Masoyin for 6 years in another monastery next to Masoyin, mainly for Abhidhamma study. She also attended a Buddhist university for 7 years, including 2 years in an MA. This nun also only graduated from 4th grade, which was the same as Mawezati from Dita. So once at Tila Shin, it took her 4 years to pass the Patamanye. So nuns with a higher degree of secular education can finish in 2 years. She therefore expressed how smart she thought the current generation of nuns were, because many of them already had this type of education. She was, however, critical about the current weighting of Lokottara and Loki education. So she explained that, I want to see Lokottara education flourishing, but now even the parents want their kids to study Loki Peña. However, as long as I can see the nuns in monks' robes, I'm happy, even if they are only studying Loki. Many of the nuns study Loki, but they don't finish after grade 10. Some leave after grade 8 or 9, and then many are spending time on their phone. When I was studying, there was no phone, and I do not know how to use Facebook or the internet. I only use my phone for conversation. So the Patana is the first to go because of its very deep nature, and people do not want to use their brain. So here she mentions nuns disrobing after grade 8 or 9. This may be due to the quality of instruction and the nuns not being able to pass these grades. Many nuns are also currently from Shan State, which I will touch on more below. So this nun mentioning that the Patana is the first text to disappear is in line with the fear of decline in the Sasana mentioned at the beginning of my presentation. So moreover, the nun explained her determination to recite the Patana every day until she dies, believing that being a human is worthy because studying Lokottara, Piya, or the Buddhist teaching, I can carry out missionary work. This knowledge is beneficial, studying Lokottara. I can return the gratitude to my parents and the teachers. And then she uses the word Jesusat, so returning the gratitude. So passing the exams that emerged was not the only challenge. Gendered practices concerning food also represented a problem. So along with the teaching nun, I had visited 2 other nuns in their late 30s at Amy Ojang. So they were studying for the Dhammasariya from monks. Their only complaint was regarding the alms rounds that had to be performed twice a week. So for Tilashin, alms runs can be all-day events. They are the 2 days before Upotne. So monks, on the other hand, either participate in alms run every day or are fed at their monasteries, depending on the monastery's rules and how much donor support they have. So because the nuns might be away all day and the teaching monks do not forego lessons on this day, the nuns run the risk of falling behind. So nunneries as well as monasteries support themselves in different ways, which can impact their educational endeavors. And I have more written about that, but because of time, I will skip that. So then finally, our last nunnery here, Jiang. So older nunneries that are not now teaching nunneries may have been at one time and may also follow the traditions of the founding nun or main nunnery. So the founding abbess resided at Jailat starting in 1928 after it had just been built as a nunnery with a corresponding monastery up the hill. The nunnery's founding abbess was from Ojang, so therefore Jailat is considered a branch or division. And I have resided at Jiang for short periods since 2012, with my longest stay being around 7 months. I spoke on many occasions with the abbess as well as the nun who is next in line to inherit the nunnery, Manyanati. Because Jiang is not considered a teaching nunnery in the strictest sense, nuns studying for the Padmapian and the Dhammasariya need to attend classes elsewhere. And at the current time, there are around 50 nuns. In 2012, there were 14. So you can see that there has been an increase. I think last year there was 30. So this year there's 20 new nuns. So while some nuns may succeed in finishing their education, others may have to sacrifice their own learning to help others. Samanyanati's education trajectory was also very like that of the other nuns mentioned before. She too had only finished 4th grade at a secular school and had finished the Padmapian. She studied at Myanmar-Burmese and at a nearby monastery with a well-known monk as her teacher. Samanyanati could not finish her education as the nunnery became involved in a lawsuit with the monastery up the hill over rights to the nunnery's land. And problems with land seems quite common. Unwilling to let the abbess or the one responsible for her stress over the matter, Manyanati had to cut back on her studies to fight the suit. So this demonstrates the responsibility in Jesusa in taking care of one's teacher, even if that means abandoning their own educational career. So Manyanati's monk teacher testified in court as a witness of the land transfer agreement between the former and the current abbess. So I believe this is a further example of the responsibility a teacher bears for his students. So at that time, such transfers were performed orally through a donation ceremony and not through a written contract. So the picture of this monk who has since passed away is displayed in the main hall of Jailat, higher than any other picture, thus illustrating the nuns' respect and gratitude towards him. So even though Manyanati was not able to finish her education and obtain the Dhammasariya, I find her to be a very bright nun. And I credit her in moving her relatives into reputable schools and supporting them in any way possible. While only one of her brothers has remained a monk, through her connections, he was able to be admitted into certain schools. He credits her for her support and mentions how proud he is of her as a nun. So Manyanati also influenced her nieces, who followed her to Jailat, as well as a few nephews, such as the one from Yasaja, who taught the Dhammanejo to the nuns at Dita. So these examples all speak of the tremendous feelings of responsibility monks and nuns have towards their kin, and the amount of gratitude in Jesuset that manifests towards the ones who have assisted them along the way. So while Manyanati is now responsible for 5 young nuns, of whom 3 are relatives, the majority of new young nuns at Jailat, as well as generally in Sagaing, are predominantly from Shan State. I don't know exactly how many there are now, but at the time there were 12 young nuns, mostly from the commonly known Exonim, the Palang ethnic group. However, they had originally been accepted into Myanmar-Burmese. So these nuns switched residency due to Myanmar-Burmese changing its rules by forbidding the study of secular education. So you can see there's kind of this love-hate relationship with secular education. These nuns from Shan State, however, believed in the necessity of a secular education and Burmese language acquisition. Therefore, the guardian nuns struck a deal with Jailat to let them reside at Jailat until they were inclined to switch to the stricter monastic education. So this arrangement indicates that while there may be restrictions, accommodations are made. So the guardian nuns remain responsible for these nuns, thus carrying out the responsibilities and maintaining their commitments. So, however, head nuns may resist the idea of a nunnery being instrumentalized by nuns to receive a secular education. So a few nuns informed me that the nuns and monks from Shan State predominantly, but not always, disrobe after their secular education. So this may be why Amy Ojang changed his rules, although I'm not sure. So monks who gather boys and girls from the border areas to turn them into monastics have contrasting motivations when compared to the children who follow them, as well as the children's parents who allow them to go. So the parents desire their children to reside in safe spaces, to escape war-torn areas, and obtain a secular education that will benefit them in the future. Nevertheless, studying secular education allows the nuns the means to strengthen the religious orientations of their trajectories. So from my data, and as previously mentioned, the teaching nuns note that nuns with a secular education have the ability to pass the monastic exams basic levels in less time. So Manyanity also believes that nuns with a secular education are much better qualified to converse with the laity, and she commented that English language acquisition is important, allowing the nuns to travel and to propagate Buddhism. And on a more practical level, knowing English is important if the nuns become ill and are hospitalized, as their medical records are written in English. And then real quick, so two other nuns at Jaitla, not related to Manyanity, in their late 30s, reside in a different building up the hill. They had attempted the Dhammasriya once and failed, but I believe this year they have passed. And this year is kind of an anomaly because I heard that there were many nuns and monks that passed the Dhammasriya, which I don't know if it's just this year that this will happen or if this will continue to happen. Maybe somebody here knows that answer. So I had questioned them about some of these critiques about the exams, and they were kind of confused and probably had never really thought about it. The two nuns at Jaitla explained that even though it may take years to pass the exams, even to just study for them meant they were accruing merit or kudoyade, and it was an honor to be able to study and learn the Buddhist teachings. Manyanity believes, however, that certain monasteries and nunneries train their students very well within their institutions. And so while some monks and nuns may only study exam material and may not have sufficiently strong grasp of its content, others may be better trained following the institution's pedagogical methods. All right, so in conclusion, finally, so here I highlighted the lived career experiences of Tilashin with the monastic exams from 3 different nunneries. So for the nuns I have concentrated on, their education trajectories demonstrate the various paths that can be taken with the newer generations desiring more secular education. So by elaborating on the connections between the nunneries and monasteries, I showed the interlocking relationships that produce flexibility and support, demonstrating that even if there are restrictions, solutions and exceptions can be negotiated. So it is important to note that these experiences are not representative of all Tilashin. So while these nuns had pretty much positive experiences to share, I've also encountered nuns from nunneries not covered here who took a critical stance towards the exams, but they also mentioned the difficulties for women and nuns in general. So with regards to monastic kin, I've showed the nuns' interlocking relationships and how some nuns have informal power in influencing their monk and nun relatives. The dynamics between Manyanity and her monk kin demonstrated this type of power and influence. Her brother has also elaborated to me on the responsibility in Jesusat that he has in taking care of his monastic relatives. And in his case, this relates especially to his sister, who he renders as instrumental in his formative years, and his responsibility to his students, who are predominantly women lay devotees. So the support of nuns and lay women by monks is not sufficiently stressed in scholarship, and more attention needs to be given to examples of cross-gender solidarity. Members of society fulfilling their reciprocal duties and the interlocking relationships that result are important themes in the Singalovada Sutta that Lady Seattle bases his text on. In addition to this text, the suttas from the Pali Vinaya, in the Mahawega that contain the responsibilities that teachers and students have towards each other should be revisited as important for understanding Burmese monasticism. These formative texts help condition the Burmese Buddhists to understand the duties and responsibilities all beings have towards society, and in paying respect and returning the gratitude to those who have taken care of them. So these interlocking relationships between teachers and students and between monastic kin are instrumental for the success of those involved and are important in the Tilishan's education trajectories. And then learning this text along with the Dhammapada is unique and different from the monk syllabus for the monastic exams. I had asked Ma Nyanati if she thought the replacement of the Vinaya with the Dhammapada was acceptable as opposed to filling the space with a different text. And her reply was that it was kaunde, or beneficial, because she can say that the Dhammapada is the si anit, or literally meaning essence or gravy. So the Dhammapada is considered a condensed version of the prime extractions from the Tipitaka. Ma Nyanati also commented that by studying the Dhammapada, one can practice and apply the text in the Loki or Lakotara. So the study of these Sutanta texts is a good example of the nuns' in-betweenness. Ma Nyanati and Ma Wezati explained again that these texts are both useful for the Loki and Lakotara. Their study allows for nuns perhaps to connect differently with the laity than the monks do. Additionally, the nuns are receiving increased secular education and English language training. Hence, nuns may be increasingly better qualified to propagate Buddhism abroad, a domain that has mainly been reserved for monks. For now, monks hold the majority of the responsibility in dispensing the teachings at the upper levels of monastic education, as well as abroad, and they continue to occupy a place in many nuns' eyes as superior teachers. So learning from monks does produce interlocking relationships with them, and some nuns continue striving in their monastic careers, propagating Buddhism to return the gratitude as a form of jesuset to them and others. It is only a matter of time until greater responsibility will be dispersed to the Tilashin, who will be obliged to teach future generations. So could this be a case of the teachings falling fully to the Tilashin in the future, with the country changing rapidly, such as has happened in certain areas with Sanskrit in India, that was once only taught by men, but is now upheld and taken care of by women, as Laurie Patton notes in her work? Maybe not, and only time will tell, but a definite shift in knowledge production is taking place. And the future directions for the nuns' learning may be brighter than it seems. And that is all. So thank you for hanging in there. And here's my bibliography.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Rachelle. So, right, we have a question straight away, I think. So we have a question in the chat. Do the nuns ever teach the monks? So I think we are going straight into Q&A. Yeah, I think that's appropriate.
I've never seen it with the monastic exams. I've only seen it at like a university setting or a college setting, where maybe the nuns teach English, or I do see nuns teaching like novice monks, but that's all I've seen. So I would say, unless somebody else knows differently, no.
Yes, based on my observation, I haven't actually come across the nuns teaching the monks. So in the context of Pariyati, for example.
Yeah.
We have a question from Kate, I think. Kate,
yes. Thank you. My dodgy connections. Yeah. Thank you very much. Very interesting talk. I have a couple of questions. One of them is just the kind of aside you mentioned, the connection between Lady Sayadaw and Anagarika Dharmapala. If you could just say a bit more about that, I'm really interested in what was happening between Sri Lankan and Burmese revivalists, shall we say, around that time. I'm also curious about when we have the first kind of Buddhist mission schools in Myanmar. And if, just in case that's something you've become aware of, but more specifically about nuns and education, I'm curious about the rewards for sitting exams and whether these are shared and the same between monks and nuns when they sit the same exams and are placed in them, or whether there are differential rewards, if you see what I mean.
Regarding the first question, with Dhamapala, I don't know. When I was just researching about Lady Sayadaw and the Dukumara Magadipani, and the Stimulova Sutta, I couldn't find much, but I came across Dhamapala and him, he wrote a similar text in 1895, and so I thought, well, Lady Sayadaw, that would have been around the same time, and so I just kind of thought maybe that there was some connection, but I'm not a historian, and I don't know. But it would be great if somebody could find that out again. And I don't know the date of the Dukumara Magadipani. I can't. It's not in the text that I have. So I don't know. The mission schools, I'm not sure what you mean by that. If you mean like
well, I suppose I was thinking about the influence on Anagarika Dharmapala of kind of theosophical model and the response to Christian mission schools by creating Buddhist mission schools. And I'm aware that, for instance, Shinukata established a Buddhist mission school after this is a generation or even two later. So in the 1930s, he established a Buddhist mission school. He'd been in India influenced by Theosophy. So that's happening then. But I wondered if it was happening earlier. And that mission school included secular topics as well. And was specifically a response to the advantages, I think, of Christian mission schools. So trying to give the same advantages to rural Burmese. And I just wondered, what, it's a tangent to your research. So I just threw it in there just in case, because I was curious about it. But
that is interesting. I unfortunately don't have much information about that, but it's definitely very interesting.
And then my final question was just about when nuns get ranked in terms of their pass mark in exams, do they get the same benefits as monks in, if they do well in exams?
That's a good question, and I also don't know. I haven't looked too much about what happens when they, like, what they get or the titles they receive. Maybe somebody here
Maybe someone in the audience.
would know.
Thank you. But thank you, very interesting.
Perhaps Tony's got his hand raised.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, for the very fast. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you for the very fascinating talk. I learned a lot, and wonderful to see like your research. This is we're colleagues, but first time I've seen it presented, so I was really happy to learn about it. And I mean, I have a bunch of questions, but the one question that came out that really struck me was, what kind of self-narratives do these nuns have about their role in the decline of the sasana? And you have a lot of maybe mid 20th century, you have some movements towards trying to have a bhikkhuni full ordination revived. And part of that, I think, has to do with the idea of, you know, the more nuns we have ordained, the better it is for the sasana. So I'm wondering, do the nuns ever speak about their own role in stemming the decline of the sasana, and are there any kind of counter narratives to that? And then how does the whole idea with the secular and monastic education work in with that? Like, you know, there's too much Loki education, and that's gonna hasten the decline. We need to go back to Lokutara education because that will stem it. So I'm just wondering about these narratives of the decline in your research, if you've seen anything.
I can't say that I've focused on that so much. And again, I'm not such a historian. Again, like that one nun said about, I definitely talking about the patana. You know, there's such an emphasis on the patana and that's the first text to go. Sorry, what was your second question about the?
Yeah, so I mean, did they see the intrusion of the Loki education as like hastening this decline? Is that, I mean, it's a threat?
Yeah, again, it's like a love-hate. It's like on one hand, they see it as a threat because I think, you know, many nuns often will just become nuns just to study Loki, and then once they're finished, they'll disrobe. But then many nuns feel that, you know, that Loki is very important because it again strengthens the religious, because one nun I spoke to, she would rather take a nun. She, I think, came in first in like the Nikaya examinations, and she told me that she would rather take a nun and teach a nun who had finished a BA degree rather than just a little nun, because they could pass the monastic examinations very quick. So it is necessary, but then again, a lot of schools, a lot of border schools won't take monastics. So there's a fear that if they take a monastic, that perhaps they'll disrobe. These are like secular private schools. So there's again this kind of like love-hate, I don't know, relationship. I don't know if I answered your questions, but
Oh no, thank you so much.
Thank you. We have a question, well, actually two questions from Jennifer. The first question is, could you say a bit more on the guardianship relationship? Because you in the because you did not talk about the abbesses, so could you say a little bit more about the structure of that relationship?
Yeah, so I can mostly only talk about what I saw at the nunnery that I stayed at, Trajectories. So the abbess, maybe in her late 70s, 80s, and I'm assuming that you mean the relationship between the.
Yes, I think the question is about the structure in terms of guardianship. So the role that perhaps the abbess play in terms of kind of playing as a guardian, and okay. Yes.
Yeah, so the abbess here is older, and so the nun that's second in line, and I think this is common throughout nunneries, the nun that's second in line does a lot of like the administrative work, and she does, you know, the abbess kind of is like somewhat retired in a sense. So Manyanati was the one that really kind of took in the little nuns and had more kind of more responsibility, I think, with overseeing them. That's how I kind of saw it.
Perhaps Jennifer might be able to kind of put the question. Or Jennifer? Hi. Jennifer, do you want to ask the question and whether Rachelle has kind of answered your question? I can't hear. No. Right. Jennifer, perhaps she's trying to. Did I miss? Right. I think because we have quite a couple of questions more. So we're going to move on to Sally Panya, who's got her hand raised. Sally, can you?
Yes. Hello.
Okay.
Thank you so much for your great presentation. It's really interesting. I am Asayali Ilashim. I'm a PhD candidate in Shan State Buddhist University. So just now, Tony also asked you a question, like how we think of our role as a Tilashan in Myanmar. So this is very, we really concerned with our role and our status as Tilashan and nuns in Myanmar. So as far as I know, we don't mind with the role of precept nun, because we are just the precept nun, we are not the bhikkhunis. So we are okay with that in Myanmar. But another concern is especially with the education, because now we have dilemma. Most of the Tilashan in Myanmar, we have dilemma whether we should stick to our pariyati education, like traditional way of learning, or we need to follow the modern education style, like secular education, or even the pariyati we learn in the university, something like that. So this is kind of a dilemma for us. On the other hand, we have the threats. In these days, we have the threats, like we have to especially in the life security, or another thing is English language, because the learning English is now is important, really important for us. So, but the problem is, even though young Tilashans are eager to learn English, but our abbots and the nunneries, they don't want us to learn English, because they consider learning English may spoil us, we might disrobe or something like that. So this is our challenges at this moment. So for the fitness of survival, so we need to be excellent in both pariyati, and also we need to learn English. This is my perception. So I like to know in your research, how do you see that to upgrade our role, or to keep our role as a Tilashan in a monastic society? So do we need to learn our Buddhist teachings in a modern education system, or we should still keep traditional learning? How did you observe in that?
That's an interesting question. Yeah, it's an interesting question. I would like to see Tilashin go abroad. I would like, I feel like there is finally a desire to see nuns. When I'm in the Bay Area, I've had two lay women come up to me and say that they would like, nuns to come to the Bay Area. Maybe 10 years ago that it was kind of a different idea about nuns, but and then the only way I think to do that is to learn English and to learn, I know there's some nuns like Do Yusananyani, who's trying to train nuns to study, to learn English and to go abroad. I think it's necessary, but I do also appreciate the traditional way of learning. I had the opportunity to study parts of Patamapian with teaching nun at Ojang, and I'm just amazed at how much nuns memorize, and so losing that traditional way of learning that goes back for so long, it is a concern. I don't know, somehow there needs to be both, I guess. I don't know if that answered your question.
Yeah, it's okay. Yeah, thank you. I just want to know whether you have observed, from your respondents, whether they had that kind of problems,
That they want to change the system, change the learning, the traditional way.
Yeah.
No, not from the nuns I spoke to. No, I didn't get that kind of critique from them about learning in a different way, pariyati. But again, these nuns that I talked to were very positive, and there are other nuns that I know that are maybe quite critical, and they have studied abroad and know English, so but these nuns, no.
Mm-hmm. And one more question is, you just mentioned in your presentation, some of your respondents said because of the secular education, so they might have more opportunity to distro, something like that. So do you think, do you agree the secular education can create, can happen, it can be related to their, changing life, like from nun's life to lay life?
No, I don't see that happen. I haven't seen that happen. What I do see happening is that like Tilishin want to disrobe if they can't, pass secular education. Like, for instance, if they want to get into a certain, like the border schools, which I guess is like a kind of private school. And if they don't allow novices or nuns, then they want to disrobe. So it's almost like the secular schools need to allow monastics, otherwise then perhaps they'll disrobe. Do you know what I'm saying? Or like universities too may not accept tilashin or monks, and so then that may contribute to them disrobing because they want to learn secular education. Maybe they could learn it as a monk or a nun, but because they're not allowed to, they decide to disrobe. Does that make sense?
Uh-huh. Thank you. Thank you. for your answers.
Thank you. We have one question from Adam. Thank you for the interesting overview and exploration. Are many nuns there using the internet to expand their access to high-quality digital periodic resources, and say in a systematic way?
I haven't really come across many nuns that do. At Dita, because it is such a big nunnery and prestigious nunnery, they probably have access to digital resources. But I would say for them, or also probably Buddhist universities or maybe some of the big monasteries would, but most likely for the most nunneries, they wouldn't. And some nunneries, you know, don't allow for nuns to use phones. Like only teachers can use phones. So that's what I know of. But
Thank you. Right. So, are there any other questions? If not, we should wrap up very soon. Tony, you got your hand raised.
Yeah, sorry. Just a quick question about how you didn't talk too much about pati pati, and like, I mean, it seems like, I don't know, did the nuns not value that as much in terms of the education and what it brings to them, or how do they view the relationship between pariyatti and pati pati?
you know, I think like all nuns like engage probably in some form of pati pati. There's times for meditation or but yeah, these so it's in my dissertation I focus on like nuns that are strictly like pati pati, but this paper I focused more on the pariyatti side. But yes, I think like all nuns, you know, do both in some way, just are maybe more focused. You know, even nuns that do pati pati, I mean, they're still like learning through, you know, maybe some sort of books or sermons or, but yeah.
Thank you.
We have a hand raise. Manuel, can you unmute and ask your question?
Sure. My question is, I actually written it in the chat room, but I'm curious. Thank you, by the way, Rachel. Super, very stimulating. I enjoyed this very much.
Thank you.
I even sent you an email already, by the way.
Oh.
So have you witnessed any areas of social services interventions provided by nuns which actually contrast with the monks?
What do you mean by social services or
I know, for example, in the Thai case, sometimes nuns will provide different material to women inmates, which the monks don't. And so that kind of approach whereby they would have a filling a gap of social workers for women.
Yeah, there are nuns that do that kind of stuff, or like have orphanages or run care homes for the elderly. And I think I've heard some monks kind of like I heard one monk say that nuns should be more like Mother Teresa or something like that, like kind of providing more again, like you said, social services. I think there's that kind of yeah, I think more and more it's happening, I would say. In contrast with monks, I see monks also doing certain social services, like one monk takes in villagers who maybe are considered to be going in the wrong direction, and he had me teaching English for them sometimes. So, but there's like Dita who does a lot of social projects. So yeah, I think it's hard to say whether what services might be done that monks wouldn't be doing, but it's a good question.
May I interrupt?
Yeah.
Because I am a nun. I'm a Myanmar nun, so I can answer this question. Most of the nuns that we provide in social services is not really white, but the thing we can do is in the funerals we do chanting, parita chanting and the patana chanting. So we do. So the bereaved family members, they can invite us, the nuns. So like maybe 20 nuns or 15 nuns. So we all chant together at the funerals. So this is the common thing that we do in contrast with monks. But I have read a paper in Australia regarding the Myanmar nuns, and I proposed one social service is Buddhist chaplaincy. We don't have Buddhist chaplaincy services in Myanmar, so I think Myanmar nun Tilashen, we can do it in Myanmar. That if you come across this kind of services, maybe you can also try to suggest us for the discussion in Myanmar. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Thank you very much. That was very helpful.
Yeah. Right. I think we have we've got all the questions. Yes. No more questions. So thank you very much, Rachelle. Now I'd like to invite Kate as well, please.
Thank you so much, Rachelle. That was a wonderful talk, and thank you to those who asked such interesting questions. I just wanted to highlight our next speaker in January 15th. This is going to be Thomas Borchett from the University of Vermont, talking about Thai monks, so governing Thai monks in contemporary Thailand, the appearance of centralization and legal pluralism. So I've put that in a chat earlier on, and I'm just going to send the link into the chat now for people who access this through an invitation or whatever rather than the website. So hope to see some of you then, and thanks, Rachelle. And if you want to unmute and unvideo just to give Rachelle an idea of who her audience was, because it can be a little bit disconcerting talking to a screen, in order to say thank you, that would be great. So I'll do that first. Thank you, Rachelle, very much.
Thank you.
Really interesting talk.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was very stimulating.